It is great to be here, even when you're the date that Greg takes to the prom, not the date Greg asked to the prom. It is a blessing, and thank you, Greg, for inviting me. And to be fair, he had told me quite a while back, I'm going to invite you to chapel sometime, but it's easier since you're in town to always have a backup. So I'm happy to be here, even if I'm the backup. Reformation itself is about a backup, about a return, about a refocusing. The gospel lesson for Reformation Sunday comes from the Gospel of John. Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying, 'You will be made free'?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits a sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. If the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." Reformation Sunday and the heritage of Reformation in the Protestant Church is one of the most easily misunderstood days, one of the most easily misunderstood celebrations, because it quickly becomes about celebrating our heritage. At one point, pastors seemed to think the thing to do would be to read Luther's 95 Theses, a long, boring set of medieval theology. Frankly, it's best left nailed to the door, because it makes these celebrations about some kind of heritage fest or pep rally spirit day. Reformation at its heart, though, becomes a question of whether we're called to say what those who've gone before us said, and to decide things that they decided for ourselves, or whether we're called to see ourselves as heirs to a struggle. When we hear the word freedom, we do just what Jesus' audience does, and we think, what's your point? We are free. But the fact is, we're not. We're not free any more than Jesus' hearers who were living under oppression were free. Yes, we may not have some foreign occupier over us, but we're slaves just the same. Slaves to our jobs, slaves to money. For students, you're slaves to success and needing to prove your worth. Just like Jesus' audience, we too are slaves to sin. We can earn all we want, pretend all we want, get every degree there is, and yet it won't change the fact that we are incapable of living up to the vision God has for us. And deep down inside, we know it. Gloria Steinem once said, "The truth will set you free, but first, it has to piss you off." And the truth is, it will put you to death. The truth will kill you. And that's why we would rather cling to something other than the ultimate truth. That's why we would rather, just as the church, for all of its history, has often defaulted into lying to ourselves to say we are good enough. We have gotten it right. The fact is, as much as we try, we can't do anything more than help the world, and we certainly can't save it. When I was a kid, I used to hate going to church. At least the beginning. I actually preferred to be a little bit late, which wasn't a problem, coming from the family I came from. I didn't like being there on time because the confession at the beginning of the service bugged me. Why start with all of that? We're slaves to sin. The truth is not in us. We can't do it. We are broken. But the fact is, rather than deny our circumstances, the gospel calls us to face the truth. The gospel calls us beyond that truth too. The fact that we are poor, miserable, wormy sinners points to something beyond that. Because we are poor, miserable, wormy, forgiven sinners. There is a theology there that calls for something humble and persistent. On the issue of Reformation, the question comes, what is God calling the church to next? What is God calling the church to be in light of this? As I said before, the temptation is for all churches to call tradition whatever it was when I was confirmed. Whatever the church did is what it should do. The problem with the tradition of Reformation is we can often say, oh, look, Martin Luther is our hero and the church got it right. There are a lot among our tradition that wants to do that. But instead of doing what the Reformers did and answering the questions the way the Reformers answered them, their heritage tells us we have to answer the questions anew. Tim Lull, a great Reformation scholar, wrote an amazing book called My Visits with Martin Luther. In it, he described being visited by the ghost or spirit or haunt or something of Luther, where they talked about issues of Luther's day and how he might have seen them differently after a few hundred years to think about it in heaven. But the interesting piece of that was whenever Lull would ask Luther about the issues of our day, the issues that face us now, Luther fell silent and said, those are the things for you. The problem with Reformation is not that it happened, but that it stopped. The work of the church is to reform, to engage. The best of the Lutheran heritage, and in fact the best of all the church, is that our tradition is to be called wherever God is at work in the world, to engage the world as it is, to look at ourselves as we are. The wisdom is not doing what someone once did, but in continuing the work. The wisdom is to continue in the struggle. Just as the confession and forgiveness bugged me, I hope it bugs you too. Because after all, that is what touches off everything in our Christian life. I hope when you confess, I hope when you're called to that, it bothers you. It bothers you because it makes us realize we're dependent on something far beyond us. I hope you always want to be late for church. But I also hope we make it there enough to hear the truth. Because only when we hear the truth about ourselves can we be the church that says the truth about the world around us. Amen.